Hello, and welcome to More Intelligent Tomorrow, a wide-ranging exploration of the potential impact of AI on the world around us, as envisioned by the future heroes of the human and machine intelligence revolution. How can we bring AI technologies to the Army world? We'll discuss this and more with Ashley Russell on today's episode. And now, your host, Ari Kaplan.
Ashley, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Ari.
Yeah, we're looking forward to having a great conversation.
I'm looking forward to it. Just to clarify, make sure I get this out on the table. I'm definitely speaking from my own personal experience, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Army. So I just wanted to make that clear up front.
Great. So you have an intriguing background. Why don't you tell us about what you do?
Well, currently I work in the Army, and that's been about 10 years. I've been in several different jobs, but now I work for the Office of Business Transformation in the Headquarters Department of the Army. When you think about the Title X functions of the Army: man the Army, train the Army, equip the Army, organize the Army, sustain the Army, keep it going while everybody's out there fighting. The rest of us here in the Pentagon, and in the Secretariat at least, we're definitely trusted to sustain the resource pipeline, to sustain the priorities for long enough that we can see them down the road when they get realized. The role that I have at OBT is really focused on what is our strategic vision in terms of business insight writ large, and what is our strategic vision in particular around enterprise data analytics.
What do you see are some of the current successful use cases for data science and AI in the Army or the DoD?
There's a huge Army. And there is so much going on that I'm never going to be able to understand it, even if I spend all day reading and calling people and reading and calling people. And so what I would like to say is that I work in a very specific place in the business space. And the R&D money that we mostly have is out in the weapons space. They're figuring out new fabrics, hypersonics. They're doing amazing things, Ari. I mean, every day I read a new article about something amazing that they're doing. There's so much. I heard a new one a few weeks ago that we're bringing some of the business data to, is they're doing the sensor. So they're trying to figure out which sensors should we put on soldiers and what information do we get that gives us what kind of value. You have a laundry list of options. Which ones matter? Which ones can handle combat? Which ones are going to be more reliable over a particular lifespan? Where are they made? How are they made? Can we do it organically? What are we do? Just the sensors. And that's one gigantic project that is going to reap humongous dividends. If we can tell a heart rate, or if we can tell somebody's dehydrated, or if we can get ahead of some of the actual soldier challenges that we have in terms of individual readiness using sensor data, how amazing would that be? If that commander, 100 miles away is like, Captain, you got a half dehydrated crew and they're going to pass out soon. I mean, this is me being very hypothetical, but the things that are happening out in the operational space are so creative and so cutting edge. Just last year, we created an entire new 4-star command that's only focused on the future. They're focused on drones. They're focused on new kinds of transportation. They're focused on synthetic training. They're focused on how do we make a particular soldier more lethal. I mean, our modernization priorities in the operation space, in the warfighter mission area, are vast and deep. So the things we can do with analytics for fraud, for example, we're going to try to bring those together. The things that we can do for supply chain, we can bring those things together. I know a huge focus is predictive maintenance, preventative maintenance. That's an industry kind of cutting edge that was maybe 10 years ago, but it's, we need it. And so there's these things that we're going to bring together that are new technology and bring them into the Army world. And it's going to happen piecemeal. It's not going to happen all at once. It's going to happen business line by business line. They're looking at how can we not waste money, because we're not going to get more. And it's the taxpayer money. This is dear, precious resource. And we have some serious priorities that we're trying to meet. Our strategic objectives are huge. The things we want to do are huge. We have hundreds of commanders who need good data right now.
What's so impressive about the Army is just the massive scale of what you're trying to achieve. And can you tell us about some of the culture with such a large organization?
I think when you ask me about culture, it's really hard because it's like saying American culture. And so it's just like Chinese culture. And so I've
Mm-hmm.
encountered this a lot in my life. It's what do we really mean and who are we talking about? And I think in my 10 years being around the Army, I've realized every command is different, every organization is different, every unit may be different. That's why they all have their own different patches, and they have, the Rangers are different from the Deltas, or we have a lot of different cultures. And so if there's any place that's rich with micro cultures, I would say that's the Army. When I tell people that I came up in the Army through the medical command, they kind of look at me sideways, like, oh, well, that's not the real Army. There's a whole infrastructure. And so each one of these organizations that I've been in, the medical community has a zero defect approach. They do not want, they track time, they track appointments, they track outcomes because they're a medical part of the Army. The lawyers also track time and keep track of all of their cases. Sometimes in the Army, we just shoot bullets and we're not counting. But what I can say about culture is that it very, very much depends on what's normal, and that isn't just what a leader is setting. In the Army, they have this concept of the command climate, right? The commander comes in every 2 years. He or she gets to set her tone and her parameters. He or she writes her policy letter, says, here's what we mean. This is my climate. This is the climate I want. We're talking about culture, which is regardless of the leader that's in place, what's normal around here. And so I think in terms of AI and art and analytics in general, what's normal around here isn't going to be a leader driven process necessarily, because it's going to have to be organic, and it's going to have to be a grassroots and collaborative effort. That's going to be a new culture change for some folks in the Army. I encounter that a lot.
Great. So do you self-identify as a nerd?
Oh, that's a funny question. My boss asked me that. Mr. Swan asked me that when I first met him. He's like, man, you're such a nerd. And I was like, oh man, I wish I was a nerd. Like, honestly, like I would take it as such a badge of honor if I'm a nerd light. But I told him, I said, I'm not a nerd, but I'm a nerd whisperer. Mm. Like, I can hear what they're saying, even though I don't understand all of it. I can ask a better question and get them to explain it back to me so I can explain it to you. Because there's a vast chasm between the technical folks that I work with and the executive folks that I work with. And so there does need to be a lot of nerd whispering going on. And I think some of that is, we think of that as like a soldier facing data scientist, someone who can talk to a soldier and explain what's happening.
I love it. Then you feel the Army needs nerds?
The Army definitely needs nerds. The Army is full of nerds. They may look like a regular infantry guy or a logistics officer, but there's some pretty nerdy people out there. And when I say like hypothesis testing, you wouldn't believe the number of people are like, yeah, let's do some hypothesis testing. And it really is a pretty fun environment when there's a whole section of the Army that's focused on research and development and experimentation and this culture of experimentation. And so finding allies that are the most nerdy folks I've ever met.
Talking about the data science playground and experimentation, like how do you do the balance of building versus buying, having people in-house versus consultants, figuring out what you do 3 years in advance, things like that?
I think that's actually part of my role is to try to figure out what is our capability to know those things. How do we know whether we should insource something? How do we know if we should just look internally? How do we know if we should build this as an organic capability or something that we should procure? When is this something we should be maintaining throughout the life cycle? And when is this something that we can contract out for sustainment? Do we need to teach our Army folks how to do model management? Who's resourced for that? Who's trained for that? Who at what level? So I think the question of what we buy, how we buy, when we buy is not, there's no clear method, I would say. Every commander has mission command. And so commanders are doing what they do best, which is making it work. And so there's a thousand flowers blooming right now. And commanders are really, and leaders out there are really trying to build their analytic cells. And they're each trying to do it. And my job is to make sure that the pockets of excellence, those lakes of excellence, we open it up and we learn what they're doing. And if they're figuring out a way to do a data exchange, well, let's use it. If they're figuring out how to build that interdisciplinary data scientist, let's figure out how we can all do it. I think about this as a capability. We don't necessarily have the capability in place, but we sure as heck are moving towards having the ability to understand when do we just go to Radio Shack, and when do we build our own whole tank.
Yeah, and in terms of trust, there's trust in people, and then there's trust in the data, like the data drifting, or the situation in the world, or the data changing. Like, how do either you personally trust if a model or data is good enough, or how do people around you, instill that trust and moving forward?
So I think there's two components. One is actually the capability to have trust in AI. I think that is a social question that we are all grappling with right now, every day. I think the ability to design upfront with people who are thinking with these principles for trust is very important. But when you're talking about trusting a model in particular, that for me, it's just like being a Lean Six Sigma facilitator, right? It's up to the customer. If that customer is like, this model 80%, that's fine, I'll go with it. Okay. But if I want my, top 0.02%, then that leader specification is very small. And so I think leader demand signals, that's what's going to tell us whether a model is good enough or not. The leader's perspective and the leader's agency really does have a huge influence on model adoption and acceptance. But I also think it's trying to move them away from instinct. And so it has to be a very deliberate partnership of both judgment and the numbers. And so you can't just say, I trust only my judgment and not the numbers, or only the numbers and not my judgment. It's always going to be a blend. And so I think that's one of the arts and sciences of analytics and of trying to get it applied, is making sure those customers are satisfied with the outputs that they get from the models.
Great. And if you were to envision, a happy future, a world that you would want to live in, what would that be like?
I think the first word that comes to mind, honestly, is transparent. I think we're in an age of knowledge, and we're in an age of a lot of information coming at us. And I think the more we can have that sort of food facts, nutrition label on almost everything. I remember when that first came about, Ari, and I was like, what is in my macaroni and cheese? I was just blindsided by how much sodium there was in there. I was like, no wonder I love it so much. But if you don't have that kind of nutritional facts, it's hard to make decisions. And it's hard to know, do I get the fancy mac and cheese, or is it the same? Is it better for me just because you don't know. And so I think the more we can build in metadata and transparency, and God forbid we use the word assumptions, right? Constraints, parameters. That's the scientific mindset that I'm looking for. And I believe, having come from sort of an academic background, that transparency is the key. Sharing is the key. And so being collaborative and being transparent.
From an anthropological perspective, who should be weighing in on ethics of AI and of data? Who needs to be involved to ensure that we have this more intelligent tomorrow with ethics and trust?
Honestly, I'm kind of biased, but I got to say the social scientists. They're the ones that are looking at how things impact people and then how people actually respond. So whether you're talking about psychology at the individual level, or the sociologists at the sort of macro group level, or the anthropologists at sort of what's power, what's normal around here in terms of who has power and control, what is the structure for deciding. I think all of the social sciences have a lot to say to the technology folks. And when I meet technology folks, and when I meet these advanced data scientists, and I find somebody who's interested in this trust stuff, we become fast friends.
Yeah, that's great. And the nerds, the experimental data scientists, how do you see them, like, raising them so they're focused on outcomes? It's great to experiment, but outcomes is ultimately where you benefit.
So that's actually my whole raison d'etre, is to make sure that we get some sort of business outcome from a model. Take that model the final mile, put it somewhere to do something for someone. And so I think my experimental data scientists, I need them up front and throughout. But my job is to help us all think about the end at the beginning. So begin with the end in mind, right? What am I trying? What am I trying to get? And that links back to this sort of focus on user stories vice use cases. Because if that user comes back and says, "Holy Hannah, I'm way more equipped. I have so much more insight. I can decide months before I could do this before. I have speed. I have agility." That's going to create the win. And so all these experimental folks, they're not against the business outcome. They just need to be connected to it. So just because you can predict something doesn't mean that manager knows what to do with that prediction. And so it's truly like that strategic integration that I'm so lucky to be able to do, is to bring those folks with high speed skills closer to our problems. And sometimes it's going to be analytics is the solution. Sometimes it's just statistics. You don't want, everything isn't a nail unless you're a hammer, right? So you got to be able to be agile and figure out, okay, is this an analytics solution, or can we just change our process? And that's why I love bringing the Lean Six Sigma stuff in too, because you never automate a bad process.
Great. So how does DataRobot help in that process we're talking about with the data science?
My favorite thing about DataRobot and working with you guys is that everyone thinks of it as a platform and a tool, or, like, this is the material, this is the tech. But what I found is that you guys are my soft skills. You guys are my customer facing data scientists. You guys are my enablers, solution engineering, whatever you call it. It is focused on what matters to the decider, what matters to the leader. They're really helping us think through those requirements up front for something that might get used. They're building bridges with us to some of our platforms and how we can make the most out of what we've already got. If we can put better models in our leaders' hands, what's stopping us? Well, my job is to make sure nothing. Can we get ROI? What is the ROI? What's the range of ROI? What is going to be required? And then really helping us backwards walk with our entire team towards the raw ingredients called data. And the raw ingredients are very rarely model ready. And so working with DataRobot, it's been very helpful to walk people through that process, because it's not just modeling. It is not data modeling. There's so much that happens in between. And so from data to decision is an even longer trail. And working with the DataRobot team, they help me along that whole path.
Well, yeah, we appreciate all of these kind thoughts, and it's been an incredible array of stories and journeys and thoughts of what you're doing today and where we might be headed in the future. So thank you so much for being on with us.
Thanks for having me, Ari. Thank you so much.